Welcome to this Connect M3 Thought Bite podcast recorded on the 19th of December 2024. I'm David Charles and my Thought Bite today is titled Syria. Does this make sense? And the strapline for this is, when looking at things through the other end of the telescope, you see what? The happenings in Gaza, Palestine, don't make sense to the ordinary person in the street, and there's a reason for that. When things like the Gaza genocide happen, it's because there is a will for it to happen. There is evidence that the Gaza situation was triggered by a false flag. This seems inconceivable to many, but does the idea reveal a sinister plot to wipe Gaza and Palestine off the map, so to become part of a greater Israel? And if so, does it stop there? We know what Israel is inflicting on Lebanon currently, and now the Israeli PM puts his boots on the ground in Syria. There are theories and even evidence which suggests there is a long-term plan in play in the Middle East. Strangely, it may have begun as early as 100 or more years ago, and it's very odd that there are a number of theories in circulation, seemingly having very long gestation periods. The Middle East appears to be one of them, and is certainly worth digging into. As an aside, there is one theory, or maybe fact, that suggests the cure for most cancers, a subject slightly unrelated to this, has been known about since before 1970, 55 years ago. There's a reproduction of a talk given in 1969, and it's breathtaking. In respect of cancer, it states, "We can cure almost every cancer right now. Information is on file in the Rockefeller Institute if it's ever decided that it should be released. But consider, if people stopped dying of cancer, how rapidly we would become overpopulated. You may as well die of cancer as something else." The gentleman that gave this talk announced this fact as if it was said to be held an interesting position in an organisation with its boots planted in depopulation activities. That organisation is Planned Parenthood, alive and kicking today. Of course, the ordinary person in the street would not see this as a possibility. The idea of a cancer cure being withheld as a secret would never occur to that ordinary person. But we have among us people who are not ordinary. These people act as if they are not human, and who knows for sure they are, given how some behave. But in the same disclosure about cancer, made to a group of paediatricians in a private meeting, Richard Day, that is, Dr. Richard Day, made another disclosure about sexuality. And I quote, "People will be given permission to be homosexual. That's the way it was stated. They won't have to hide it. And elderly people will be encouraged to continue to have active sex lives into their very old ages, just as long as they can. Everyone will be given permission to have sex, to enjoy however they want. Anything goes." The summarizer of the talk says, this is the way it was put. What we are seeing happening in the world today with respect to the alphabet of agendas, the LGBTXYZ thing, suggests another long-term agenda may have been set in motion. In the context of slowing population growth or even decreasing it, Richard Day said, the sex drive between male and female adults is too strong to change, but it can be mixed up. Well, one can say for sure that over a relatively short period of time, let's say since the late 90s and early noughties, sexuality has been mixed up. Not only that, but the mixing is now even promoted widely in the workplace, the media, and even schools, starting in primary schools. An agenda being pursued here? Who knows for sure? But listen to the account of Richard Day's secret talk to that group of paediatricians. The talk is described as a kind of confession, an early warning perhaps, even an offload of his conscience. Perhaps it was very helpful hint, but how our world is being manipulated. Manipulated, that is, by people working in concert without even knowing they are, without us people even suspecting they are. The above account suggests there is a strong evidence for plans being decided, orchestrated, and then played out, where the length of time is never the issue. Now, in the case of the United States, this idea of a long-term plan is not in the least a new idea. There are a number of accounts of the US pulling strings in far-off lands, strings to gain general influence, political power, and valuable resource advantages. China is another such entity, and the UK isn't blameless, of course. For reasons yet to be understood, maybe those strings in the Middle East have been pulled by our dear Uncle Sam, the US. Maybe they have been pulled as regards Syria in particular, and since the turn of the century, 24 years ago no less. When the news presented us all with these stories about ISIS running riot in the region, I personally was amazed at the military hardware they had on show. I pondered on where it all came from, who was financing them, and why. I also noticed no one appeared to be asking those basic questions. But some people were asking, and some people went deeper than I and started to string ideas and happenings together. They joined the dots, if you like, dots that weren't hidden from any of us, but instead visible to us all, if we cared enough to look and to think, perhaps. One person who looked, one person who joined the dots they found was himself a politician, and one with a conscience and a clear drive for truth. Australian Senator Gerard Rennick is one of those outspoken politicians who believes that speaking their truth is a fundamental duty. It's what politicians should be doing across the entire world, but don't. This senator is one such speaker of their truth with respect to Syria, as is Senator Ron Johnson in the US with respect to C-19 vaccines. He spoke at a recent rally in Washington, along with fellow thinkers and dot joiners, about what's happening in the realm of so-called medicine and the big pharma agenda to have everyone dependent upon the next jab. Gerard Rennick recently posted on social media a captivating idea which, given the stories and evidence slowly seeping into the public awareness, places a very interesting thought into our minds. The emphasis being mine in the PDF version of this talk. This is what he posted. What happened in Syria since 2011 was not a civil war. It was a proxy war waged by 100,000 plus jihadists flown into Syria from all over the world. In 2020, the New York Times travel section listed 31 best places to visit in the world, and Damascus, capital of Syria, was ranked number 7. The West once loved Assad. He was called the Lion of Damascus. France gave him the highest award, Legion of Honor. Queen Elizabeth invited Assad and his wife. Nancy Pelosi flew to Syria. European and Arab leaders met with him all the time. Even the Pope went to Syria. Syria under Assad was secular and moderate. Sunnis, Shiites, Christians, Kurds, Armenians in the mainly got along with each other. No Al-Qaeda, no Sharia law, no Muslim Brotherhood. In a 2009 Zogby poll, an American firm, Assad was the most popular leader in the region, but the deep state and its evil friends decided to do a regime change in Syria. The moderate rebels were neither moderate nor rebels. They are extremists and head-chopping terrorists aligned with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. The US actively planned regime change in Syria as early as 2004. In 2005, CNN's Christiana Amanpour interviewed President Assad when she brazenly told him that the US is funding Syrian opposition and trying to oust him in a coup. 2011 saw the biggest regime change operations ever conducted by the US. It was called the Arab Spring. In Egypt, Mubarak was ousted. In Libya, Gaddafi was murdered by NATO, and so on. But Syria was the exception because Assad was very popular with the people and the military. Thus, US deep state recruited Al-Qaeda. February 12, 2012, AQ leader Zawahiri called jihadists all over the world to go to Syria and fight Assad. Same day, Jake Sullivan, advisor of Hillary Clinton, sent an email. Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Al-Qaeda and ISIS got weapons worth billions of dollars. The CIA named its project Operation Timber Sycamore. Some Green Beret, that's US Special Forces, talked about it. General Flynn also wrote the famous memo in 2012 where he told the Pentagon that the groups that opposed Assad consisted of Al-Qaeda, Salafists and Muslim Brotherhood. For that, Flynn was fired. He later joined Trump's campaign. In 2016, Trump said at a forum, Obama is the founder of ISIS. Crooked Hillary Clinton was the co-founder. Al-Qaeda leader al-Golani is now the presumed leader of Syria. Shortly before the 2003 invasion of Iraq, he joined Al-Qaeda in Iraq and fought for 3 years in the Iraq insurgency. American forces captured and imprisoned him from 2006 to 2011. His release coincided with the Syrian revolution, and he created the al-Nusra Front in 2012 with the support of Al-Qaeda to take part in the Syrian civil war. In an audio statement released on the 28th of September 2014, al-Julani stated that he would fight the United States and its allies. In 2017, Trump put a $10 million bounty on Golani. But now that terrorist is whitewashed and glorified by Western propaganda. There were plenty of atrocity propaganda from the jihadists and the West regarding Assad, like the fake and staged chemical attacks. When it comes to use of chemical weapons, the mainstream narrative has amnesia. The rebels, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, HTS, al-Nusra, FSA, have produced and used sarin, chlorine and mustard gas in Iraq and Syria for a long time. Additionally, the writer here, the senator, copied this post from another posting on X. It reads, "What's tragic about Syria is that a once peaceful country was allowed to be destroyed by the deep state devils. The destruction of Syria has been occurring for over a decade, yet the Mockingbird media has never called out the involvement of the West, albeit with much funding from Arab allies who also fund Hamas." Just to be clear, I'm sure Assad was no saint, but the deaths being assigned to him last week in the mainstream media are just outright lies. Most of the deaths in Syria were the result of the invasion. Given the lies that were told in order to justify the destruction of Iraq a decade earlier, you would think that the media would have been a bit more critical in regards to what was happening in Syria. Of course, the mainstream media are nothing more than the propaganda arm of the governments today. Rather than critique the government, they just repeat the government lies fed to them. Of course, Syria is just one of many countries that have been destroyed by the deep state. Ukraine and Iran both had their democratic governments overthrown by the CIA. As a matter of fact, Trump himself was probably rolled by the CIA and the FBI in 2020. More and more reveals not just corruption in the election, but that January the 6th had agent provocateurs planted to distract from Congress scrutinizing the election results. We can only hope Trump can end the violence in the Middle East and Ukraine, you can be sure the deep state will do everything to stop him. That concludes the post by the Senator, which provides some very interesting thoughts and ideas. Do keep in mind that perhaps some of those 100,000 plus jihadists flown into Syria might just be turning up in little boats now on the south coast of England. Many are apparently Syrian, or at least come from Syria. If that was so, what could their next mission be? As they say on social media, I'm just asking for a friend. Is this a good time for us all to pay more attention, not just to what is going on in the world, but rather why it is going on in the world? What we might all find out could be earth-shattering and to the point of ruining our personal view of the world. A personal view that is predicated on the old belief that governments care for the people and believe their role is to protect us, like parents are supposed to, but don't always. Would it be safer, do you think, if we all braced ourselves for an inconvenient and uncomfortable truth, following which we can start afresh? And what would starting afresh even look like? Who knows? But I bet my life that what the people decided was best, being better than we have at present, it would without doubt be better than we have at present. At a talk recently, the subject of anarchy was raised. The definition of anarchy was shared with the audience, and it read, I quote, "The organisation of society on the basis of voluntary cooperation without political institutions or hierarchical government." This definition of anarchy came as a surprise to some people present, and may surprise you also, but it does have a nice and engaging ring about it, particularly in the context of all the above. The truth is not always a lovely and comforting thing to discover, but the reality is, if any of us want better, we have to be prepared to walk through that door, our personal door, labelled fear. Well, I'm prepared to, as you might guess from this thought bite, but the basic question here is, will you? We could hold hands and walk through together. Further thoughts, anyone? One last from me, and a piece of wisdom I heard and will never forget. The source, unfortunately, is unknown. And I quote, "When you stand on the precipice, and your next step will be into the total darkness, one of two things will happen. Your next footing will be on solid ground, or you will learn to fly." Thank you for listening to this Thought Bite today. I hope it's given you further things to think about on this particular subject. For further information on this and related subjects, do check out the PDF version of this article, which is TB-4515B. It contains a number of links to supporting articles, plus links to many other enlightening and fascinating articles on a variety of subjects. Meanwhile, I look forward to sharing my next Thought Bite with you very soon. Goodbye.